The first thing they tell you about Outer Relay Station Veln is that the posting is voluntary. The second thing they tell you is that no one stays more than 2 years. The third thing, and they say this quietly, the way you tell a person about a structural flaw in a house they've already decided to buy is that the signal rock has an anomaly. They showed me the transit logs in the regional dispatch office on Korda Station, an office I had been in perhaps 30 times in 31 years, and which smelled the same every time. Recycled air and the particular sharp undertone of a station that has been processing freight for longer than anyone currently alive can remember. The duty coordinator was a young man, maybe 30, who had the practiced efficiency of someone who had triaged a great many postings and was trying to get through mine so he could get to lunch. He pulled up the Veln file and pointed at the anomaly notation and said, "It's been flagged since the station's 3rd year of operation. You'll want to know about it going in." I read the entry, biological interference, category unresolved. I scrolled back. The previous entry said the same, and the one before that. I scrolled back through 43 years of transit log entries across 3 separate station keepers and 2 formal decommission attempts, both initiated, neither completed, both trailing off in the administrative record without resolution, as though the transit authority had looked at the problem, decided it was not quite worth the effort of solving, and simply stepped back from it, and the language never changed. Biological interference, category unresolved. I looked up from the tablet and said, 43 years. The duty coordinator said, "At least, the documentation before that is incomplete. The anomaly notation goes back to the original station survey, which predates the relay installation by 11 years. I said, "And no one has resolved it." He said, "It's a thermal bloom off the signal rock. It affects the antenna calibration twice daily. The previous keepers all managed it manually. It's a known workaround." I said, "A known workaround for a 43-year-old unresolved anomaly." He said, "The transit authority has reclassified it as a maintenance feature." I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "All right," and signed the posting agreement. I put in for Veln because I was 63 years old and I had been in mid-ring waystation hubs for 31 years and I had run out of people I needed to be near. My wife Len had been gone for 4 years, a cardiovascular event. No warning. The kind of ending that is both merciful and specifically cruel in a way that keeps finding you at odd hours without permission. My daughter Mira was on Korda Station doing fine, raising 2 children who were 7 and 9, and who did not particularly need their grandfather underfoot on a regular basis, though they were polite about it. I had colleagues I liked and none that I missed, particularly when I was not with them, which seemed like a useful diagnosis. Veln had 1 bunk, 1 terminal, 1 relay array that needed calibrating twice daily, a supply drop every 90 days, and the anomaly. I figured I would resolve the anomaly in the first month and have the rest of the posting to contemplate whatever I chose to contemplate. I did not resolve it in the first month. I arrived in early spring by the station clock, which was meaningless since Veln orbited a brown dwarf that produced barely enough output to register as light. But the clock was there, and I kept it because I had found over 31 years of relay work that the circadian rhythm is not a luxury. The station was small, a pressurized core module roughly the size of a transit personnel carrier, bolted to the basalt shelf of a reclassified asteroid fragment by 4 anchor struts, with the relay array on the upper hull, and the shelf itself extending from the lower dorsal side. The previous keeper, a young woman named Orla Sev, who had done her 2 years, and looked, in the brief handoff window at the docking collar, like a person who had decided something about herself, left the logbook current, the terminal calibrated, and a handwritten note on the bunk that said, "Don't bother with the anomaly." Kept the system stable. Just do the manual calibration and leave it. I put the note in the bunk drawer and went to look at the signal rock. The station's lower hull lights were on a timer, and at the hour I arrived, they were off, so I took a hand lamp through the interior maintenance hatch and down the catwalk. The catwalk ran above the basalt shelf, a metal walkway with a safety rail, designed for antenna inspection access, not for extended use. Below it, the shelf extended 12 meters outward from the station hull, a natural protrusion of the asteroid rock that the Transit Authority had built around rather than removed. The basalt was dark and irregular, the kind of surface that holds heat unevenly and expands and contracts with temperature cycling until it develops its own small landscape of ridges and fissures. The thermal bloom was there immediately. I felt it before I thought to look for it, a warmth against my face and the backs of my hands that had no obvious source, rising from the shelf below as though the rock were marginally metabolizing something. I ran the temperature sensor across the shelf from the catwalk. 7 degrees above ambient, consistent across the whole surface, with slight elevation toward the far end of the shelf, where it met the outer hull strut. I calibrated the antenna manually, the way the logbook described, and I went back inside and wrote my first entry. Thermal anomaly confirmed on the signal rock, source unlocated, calibration adjusted manually as per established procedure, no action taken pending further investigation. That was not entirely true. I had a theory about the source. I just needed to look at it in the dark, at the right hour, when whatever was generating it did not have 4 years of keepers teaching it to be invisible. I found it in my 3rd week, not by planning, by accident. The kind of accident that happens when you are a person who gets up at 0340 station time, because the night cycle is when your mind runs loudest, and work is a better option than lying still and having opinions about your life. I came through the maintenance hatch with my hand lamp and ran the beam along the shelf below the catwalk, and the light caught the edge of a scale. The rest of the mind assembled itself around that initial input slowly, the way your eyes adjust when you walk from a bright room into a dark one, not seeing more light but learning to use what is already there. The scale was deep rust, the color of old iron in poor lighting. It was connected to another scale, and another, and the mind worked backward from each connection and arrived, by degrees, at the fact of an animal the size of which I genuinely did not have a reference for. He was pressed into the junction between the basalt shelf and the station hull, in the deepest fold of the rock. Wings folded flat, tail running the full length of the shelf, head resting on the stone with the eyes closed, deep rust along the spine and the leading ridges of the folded wings, shading to pewter along the flanks and underbelly. An old scar on the left wing where the leading bone had broken and knit at an angle that left the membrane slightly crimped. A head the size of a loading pallet, lowered into the basalt as though resting in something it had chosen. One eye, the right, was clouded white from edge to edge, the pupil invisible behind the cataract. He was breathing, long, slow, complete breaths, the kind that have no urgency in them. The thermal bloom came from him directly, his body heat bleeding into the basalt and then up through the hull, fouling my calibration twice a day for at least 43 years. I stood on the catwalk for a long time. Then I calibrated the antenna manually, the way I had learned to do, and I went back inside and made coffee, and I sat at the terminal and thought about what I had found. I thought about it seriously, which I think was the right approach, and at the end of the thinking, I had 2 clear options. I could file a report, biological interference, category now resolved, nature as follows, which would result in Transit Authority personnel arriving at Veln to assess the situation, which would result in some kind of official determination about what to do about a dragon of indeterminate age and status who had apparently been living on the signal rock of a transit relay station for longer than the station had existed. Or I could not file a report, for now, and look at the situation more carefully before inviting anyone else into it. The scarred wing, the clouded eye, the specific way he had folded himself into the smallest version of himself that the space would allow, the way you do not fold when you are in a space that has any room for you. I decided not to file a report. I kept deciding not to file a report for the next 23 months. The 3rd week I found him. The 4th week I went to the regional transit database on the relay library connection, limited bandwidth out here, enough for text queries, and I started looking. The natural history reference section was sparse. Transit law had a section on protected species and transit corridor rights that referenced dragons in the abstract, but was clearly written by someone who had encountered them primarily as a legal category. The archived regional incident logs were more useful, though accessing them required some creativity about what I was searching for and why. It took me most of the 4th and 5th weeks. The Keth Sorvath flight line, a sovereign flight line operating out of the Cordovel Outer Reach, pre-transit era in origin, meaning they had been a presence in this transit corridor before the transit authority existed. 14 ships, last recorded as a complete formation 62 years ago. 61 years ago, a cascade failure in the transit jump sequence in the Cordovel transit corridor. The incident log entry was dry and clinical, in the way that transit authority incident logs always are, which makes them neither easier nor harder to read. It is simply the register of a bureaucracy that is reporting what the bureaucracy can verify. 14 vessels, catastrophic sequence failure. No crew survivors recovered. Anchor status, unaccounted. The anchor. I looked that up too. In the Keth Sorvath line's own records, accessible through the Regional Historical Database, the anchor was described as the founding ancient of the flight line, whose presence holds the line's coherence and whose voice the line's ships are attuned to. When an anchor goes silent, the search continues. The line continues. The search does not stop. I sat with that for a while. I went to the catwalk that night and I said, to the dark, I found the incident log. The Cordovel transit cascade failure, 61 years ago. I know what happened to your flight line. I want you to know that I know, and that the knowing is not only yours. If he was there, I could not see him. The hand lamp picked up the thermal glow of the rock, but not the shape. I ran the calibration check and went to bed. He was there the next morning, different position not pressed into the hull fold. He was in the center of the shelf, head raised a full meter above the basalt, the left eye clear, open-oriented directly toward the catwalk. I said, "Good morning." He did not speak. He looked at me with the clear eye and the clouded eye, the attention of something very large and very old and very still. I said, "I have a calibration check to run. I'll try not to be in your way." He watched the whole procedure. I talked through it not to him initially, just talking, the way you do when you are alone and the task is repetitive and the mind wants something to push against. I said, "Eastern antenna is holding. The mounting screw I retightened last week seems to be stable. The western feed is throwing a half-degree variance that I think is thermal expansion rather than mechanical, but I'm going to log it and watch." I said, "The supply drone is due in 6 days. I've been holding off on requesting a new gasket for the pressure coupling on the secondary airlock because the transit authority's fulfillment rate on maintenance hardware is approximately 60%, and I have learned to wait until I genuinely need it before I order it. Because if I order it before I need it, they will lose the order, and by the time I reorder, I will need it, and they will be confused about why I'm ordering it again." The clear eye tracked me across the catwalk. I said, "I'm going to leave the interior hatch propped tonight. Not the outer seal, the pressure stays. Just the interior hatch, so the warmth comes through. It is cold on the shelf. I am aware that you may not care about the cold. I am also aware that the brown dwarf is not exactly providing. I'd rather err towards surplus." I propped the hatch that night and went to bed. In the morning I came down and the head was 2 meters closer to the hatch than it had been. Not inside, still on the shelf, but oriented toward the warmth leaking through the gap, and the head was raised, and the clear eye was watching the hatch. I started keeping a separate log, not in the official system, a text file on the local drive, labeled thermal monitoring reference, which was technically accurate. I noted the shelf positions, the distances, the eye orientations, the quality of the attention. I noted the thermal bloom measurements. I built up, over weeks, a record of a creature who was not doing nothing, who was doing something that did not have an obvious name but was not passive. He was watching. He was tracking. He was somewhere between waiting and observing, in a space that he had occupied for, by my calculations, working from the station records and what I could find in the regional database, somewhere between 180 and 200 years, and in all that time, no one had stayed long enough to notice. In the 4th month, I started talking in earnest. Not about the calibration, about things. I talked about Lene. I talked about meeting her at a regional transit conference 35 years ago, which is an unlikely place to meet someone. except that she was there to present a structural load assessment methodology, and I was there because my supervisor had sent me to represent our relay division, and I had spent most of the conference in the back of presentation rooms, reading technical documentation, and she was the only other person doing the same thing. We had recognized each other the way you recognize people who have developed the same coping strategy. She looked up from her tablet and saw me reading mine and nodded in the brief, collegial way of someone who has found a co-conspirator. We ate dinner in the conference canteen and talked for 3 hours about structural assessment methods and relay calibration tolerances, which is not a romantic origin story but is an honest one. I talked about how she had drawn cross-sections of everything, buildings, equipment, the topology of social situations, the structure of a problem she was working through in small spiral notebooks she kept in her jacket pocket. Not for other people, for herself, because it was how she thought. She would open a notebook at the dinner table and draw the cross-section of whatever she was working through, a structural calculation, a disagreement with a colleague, a question Mira had asked that she was taking seriously, and the drawing would tell her things that the words had not. I have 34 of those notebooks in storage on Corda Station. I have not looked at them since she died. I am not ready. I will tell you that plainly. I talked about how she had been gone 4 years, and I still reached for the notebooks sometimes, a specific gravity of absence, not for any particular one, but for the fact of them. The fact of a person who drew cross-sections of things in order to understand them and left that behind in my life as both a gift and a weight. I talked about Mira, how she had her mother's eyes and her father's instinct toward outposts at the far edge of transit routes, which was less a compliment to me and more an observation about what kinds of things get passed along without anyone intending them. Her children, the 7-year-old and the 9-year-old, had neither of those things that I could see yet. The 9-year-old liked to take apart small mechanical items and attempt to reassemble them, which was promising. The 7-year-old liked to argue about the names of things, which I found encouraging. I talked about the 31 years I had spent in relay work, which was good work, useful work, the kind that keeps the transit network functioning and that no one thinks about until it fails. I talked about the specific pleasure of a well-calibrated antenna, which is not a pleasure most people understand, but which is real. The clean alignment of the signal path, the absence of interference, the sense of something working correctly that is not flashy or visible, but that other things depend on. I talked about the mid-ring hub stations I had worked at over 3 decades, loud, layered, populated places where you could go a whole shift without a moment of actual quiet, and how I had thought for many years that this was what I wanted, and had understood only slowly, and then more quickly after Lenny died. That what I had wanted was not the noise, but the sense that the noise was holding something I cared about. He listened. I could not have proven this in any way that would satisfy a formal inquiry, but there is a quality to being attended to that you recognize when it is present and notice as a hollowness when it is absent. He was on the shelf consistently now, not pressed into the hull fold, in the center, head raised, the clear eye on me from the moment I came through the hatch. The breathing changed when I was on the catwalk, very slightly, a deepening, a settling, an orientation of the body toward my position that was not random. These were small things. I cataloged them carefully, because small things are what you have when the large things are not yet available, and small things honestly attended to are not nothing. I started noticing other things too. He had preferences about the catwalk sessions that had no obvious utility. He seemed to attend differently when I talked about specific things than when I talked about others. The antenna calibration, present but diffuse. The supply drone schedules, focused, tracking. Stories about Len. The breathing would slow further, the body settle slightly, something in the quality of the listening becoming more complete. As though this was the kind of content worth expending resources on. I do not know what a very old dragon finds interesting. I know that grief, or something in the register of grief, seemed to be recognizable to him. That was not nothing either. In the 6th month, the Transit Authority ran an inspection sweep of the outer Cordavel relay chain, 4 stations in 7 days, routine. I had 4 days' notice. An inspector named Fen Solve arrived on a courier shuttle, young, efficient, carrying a reference tablet, and the expression of a person who considers himself thorough. He went through the terminal logs, checked the antenna array from the upper hull access port, looked at the calibration records, asked about the anomaly. I said, tidal stress effect on the basalt. Brown dwarf tidal activity produces heat in certain silicate iron compositions. It's been flagged since the station's 3rd year. Manual calibration workaround is well established. He checked his tablet. The tab confirmed this as plausible, which it was, because tidal stress in basalt iron is a documented phenomenon, and Vellne's brown dwarf was well within the range to produce it. The fact that the bloom was generated by something else entirely was not visible in the calibration records because I had not made it visible. He asked if the anomaly had affected station operations. I said, twice daily manual calibration, under 20 minutes each time, no impact on relay performance or uptime. He made a note. He drank my coffee, which I make well. It is one of the things I can claim. He did not go to the maintenance hatch. He left on day 2. I went down to the catwalk that night, later than usual, and I said, the inspector is gone. He didn't come below. I believe he didn't think to. I want you to know that I made an active choice here, and not a passive one. I did not file a report, and I will not file one, and that's a decision I'm making with full awareness of what I'm deciding. I don't know if that matters to you. I think it probably matters to me, to be honest about what I'm doing rather than pretending I'm simply forgetting to do paperwork. The head was a meter from the hatch. The clear eye was on me, direct, with no ambiguity. I said, I'd like to keep doing what we're doing, if that's acceptable. I have 4 years on this posting, possibly more if I renew. You have apparently had this address for 180 to 200 years, so I am not under any illusion about who the long-term resident is. I am asking permission of a kind, I suppose. Which may be strange to hear, but there it is. The breathing was even. I went and calibrated the antenna. When I came back, the head had not moved. The eye was still on me. I sat down on the catwalk deck, back against the rail, level with the muzzle at 3 meters distance. It was a deliberate choice. I had been standing for 7 months because standing felt like the appropriate posture for someone who was uncertain of their reception. Sitting felt like I had decided something. I said, I've been thinking about the silence, the 61 years of it. I don't want to presume I understand what that's been. I've been quiet for 4 years since Lene died, and that's not the same kind of quiet, and I know it. But I've been thinking about what silence does to a person, or to whatever a very old dragon is, when a person is not the right word. How it starts as the only true response to something unendurable, and ends as the condition of your life, so that you can no longer distinguish what you chose and what you've become. I've been thinking about that. The muzzle was still. I said, I'm not trying to talk you out of anything. I want to be clear about that. I'm just here, and talking, because I find it useful, and because you appear, so far, not to object. He did not object. In the 8th month, I installed a secondary heating coil on the catwalk, rated for maintenance crew use in cold cycle shifts. This was a legitimate equipment category on the station's approved list, and I ordered it on the supply request without marking it as anything other than crew comfort equipment, which was what it was. I had thought about it for some time before ordering, not about whether to order it, but about the right way to do it. I did not want to make a performance of it. I did not want him to see me making an accommodation and understand it as a statement about our arrangement. I wanted it to be what it was, a heating coil, ordered through the appropriate channel, installed in the appropriate location, doing the thing a heating coil does. The fact that the warmth leaked through the propped hatch in the right direction was a matter of physics, not ceremony. I ran the coil on the catwalk floor at the low setting on cold cycle nights, and the warmth leaked through the propped hatch in the right direction. And the first night I ran it, I sat on the catwalk deck with my back against the rail and watched the muzzle inch forward across the threshold of the open hatch until it was resting across the metal sill. The great head too large to enter properly, but the warmth close enough to matter. And I thought, here we are. I said, here we are. The left ear, a long cartilaginous ridge along the jawline, rotated toward me. A small movement, Not a response exactly, something in the register of acknowledgement. In the 9th month, he moved first, for the first time. I arrived at 0340, and he was already in the center of the shelf, head raised, watching the hatch before I came through it. I had been thinking about this. His approach to the catwalk had been gradual, and mine to him had been gradual, and this meeting in the center, him anticipating my arrival rather than reacting to it, felt like a different kind of thing. Not dramatic, just different. The way a relationship becomes different when one person stops waiting to see what the other will do and starts simply being present in anticipation of them. I stood in the hatch for a moment and took that in. He was, I think, enormous in a way that I had stopped registering on a daily basis, which is one of the stranger things I could say about the 23 months I spent at Veln. The first time I had seen him on the shelf, he had taken up the whole field of my perception and pushed everything else out. By the 9th month, I came to the catwalk and saw him, the clear eye, the head raised, the thermal bloom warm on my face. The scale of the thing had become context rather than content, the way the brown dwarf's minimal light became context, the way the basalt shelf's particular smell became context. He was where I was going. The fact that he was vast was part of that, not a separate fact. I said, "Good morning, you're up early." The clear eye on me, the clouded eye beside it, the whole ancient heavy head oriented to me with the precision of something that has been tracking my sound and heat signature through a steel hull for months. I said, "I ran a query on the regional historical database last week, the Keth Sorvath line's own archival records, the ones accessible through the transit network. I was not trying to intrude. I wanted to understand the right word for what you are, and what this place is to you, if there is one. The records use the word anchor." The breathing was steady. I said, I looked up what that meant in the context of a flight line. The founding ancient. The one whose presence holds the line's coherence. The one whose voice the ships are attuned to. When the anchor is silent, the search continues. The line continues. The search does not stop. I paused. I said, "I want you to know that I know there are ships looking for you. I don't know where they are currently in the search. I don't know what they know about Veln, specifically. I know that the basalt transmits heat. I know that you've been here for a very long time. I don't know how detectable that is or isn't. But if the question is ever relevant, if there is ever a moment when that question comes to the surface, I want you to know that you are not undiscoverable here by accident. You are undiscoverable here by choice. And I understand something about choosing to be undiscoverable. I won't make decisions about that for you." The head turned, very slightly, and the clear eye was fully on me. I ran the calibration. I went back inside. I left the hatch open. In the 11th month, he started tracking the supply drops. I noticed it because the supply drone's approach vector was visible from the outer hull observation port, and I had gotten into the habit of watching it arrive. There is something satisfying about a supply drop when you have been on a single person posting for 11 months. A kind of solitary event that you look forward to in the way you look forward to small, reliable things. I went to the observation port on drop days and watched the drone come in. And I noticed that when I went to the observation port, the thermal bloom on the catwalk shifted. Warmer. He had moved toward the station on the shelf below, oriented upward, toward where I was standing. He knew the drone schedule. He had learned the drone schedule. He was watching me watch for the drone. I thought about that for a while. On the next drop day, I went down to the catwalk before I went to the observation port, and I said, "Supply drop in about 2 hours. Coffee, protein blocks, the pressure valve I've been waiting on. And if the transit authority has managed to pull itself together, a circuit board for the secondary antenna feed that I have now requested 3 times. If it's not on this drone, I am going to log a formal maintenance delay complaint, which will be ignored, but the act of filing it is satisfying." The clear eye was on me. The body had shifted toward the hatch. I said, "I'll tell you what's on it when I know." I unpacked the drone manifest in the docking bay, and then came back to the catwalk and narrated the inventory item by item. The coffee, the protein blocks, the pressure valve. No circuit board. I said, no circuit board. I'm going to file the complaint. I'm going to be very specific in the language. I've been writing relay maintenance complaints for 31 years, and I know how to make them land. The left ear twitched. I said, that may have been amusement. I'm going to take it as amusement. I filed the complaint. The circuit board came on the next drop, 45 days ahead of schedule, which was the fastest fulfillment I had received in 11 years of relay work. I told him about it when it arrived. I said, the complaint worked. I don't know if that's causal. I choose to believe it is. In the 13th month, I ordered the thermal blanket. It was in the approved equipment category, exterior component protection, rated for use on station hull surfaces in high thermal cycling environments. I put it in the outer maintenance compartment on the shelf side, folded, accessible. I did not deploy it. I wanted him to know it was there without making a performance of it. He noticed the compartment door was different. It took him 2 days. I saw the attention shift, the head angling toward the new installation, the nostril flaring slightly to read it. I opened the compartment and showed him the blanket. I said, it's rated for the thermal range on the shelf. It's folded in thirds. I don't know if it would be useful. I know the cold is not the same problem for you that it is for me, but it's there, if it ever seems worth trying. He looked at the blanket for a long time. Then he looked at me. I said, no pressure, just available. In the 14th month, he made a structured sound for the first time. I want to describe this carefully, because I was not at all certain, in the moment, what I was hearing. It was deep, deeper than I can reproduce, deeper than I think the human vocal range touches at all, something that lived below the register of voices and above the register of vibration. It came from his chest, structured, shaped by intention, rather than expelled by reflex. One sustained syllable, harmonically complex, with overtones I could feel in the catwalk rail through my palms where I was holding it. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then it was done. I stood very still for a moment. I said, I hear you. He held the position, head raised, both eyes on me. The sound faded, but the intention still present in the way he was holding himself. The specific stillness of a creature that has said something and is waiting to know whether it was received. I said, I hear you. I don't know what you said. I'd like to, eventually. I'm not going to pretend I'm certain I know what it means for something your age to speak after 61 years. I'm not going to make too much of it, but I want you to know I heard it, and I'm here. He held the eye contact for another moment. Then he lowered his head to the wing and closed his eye. I went back inside and added a note to the separate log file. 0406, station time. He made a structured vocalization. Duration, approximately 4 seconds. Not a word I can identify. Clearly intentional. Clearly directed at me specifically, not at the space or the hatch or the heat source. At me. I sat with that for some time. He spoke that sound, that same shaped syllable every 2 to 3 weeks after that. Always at the 0340 session, never at other times. Always directed at me. I kept recording, and I spent an increasing amount of my off-shift time playing the recordings back on low volume, trying to map the harmonic variations, trying to hear whether there was grammar in the repetition. There was something, a pattern that varied within specific constraints, a range of expression within a limited phonetic form. I was not a linguist. I was doing what a relay technician does, which is look at a signal long enough to understand it. In the 16th month, I said, I've been listening to the recordings for 2 months. I think there's structure in what you're saying. I think it's the same vocalization, but the meaning varies within it the way a word can hold different weights depending on context and tone. I don't know if I'm right. I know that I listen to it, and something in me responds to it in a way that is not the same as ambient noise. Something in me attends to it. He was watching me with the precise focus that I had come to understand as his version of full attention, which was significant in a creature capable of existing for weeks in something very close to non-response. I said, I'm telling you this because I think you should know that it's landing. Whatever you're doing, I want you to know that it's landing. He made the sound. It was different that night. I could not have explained the difference in technical terms at the time, though I understood it later. The harmonic structure was the same. But the quality of the intention was not the same. It was directed differently, not toward the space between us, but at me, specifically and deliberately, in the way that someone says a name. I said, "Keth," and he lowered his head and closed his eye, and the thermal bloom on the shelf registered 3 degrees warmer than its usual baseline, which I logged as normal, which it was. 3 weeks after that, at 0347, he said it clearly. 2 syllables, short, precise, with the harmonics arranged not as exploration, but as declaration. Keth. He said it at me. Not toward me. At me. With both eyes open and the clear eye straight on mine. I said, "Keth." He exhaled. A long, deep breath, slow, the warmth of it rising visibly in the station's cold corridor air where it leaked through the propped hatch. He lowered his head to the wing. He did not speak again that night. I went and looked up the word. It took me the better part of 3 weeks of careful queries to the regional historical database, framed as terminology research for relay documentation purposes. Keth, a term of address in the Sorvath line's recorded dialect, used by senior ancients to acknowledge a bond of sustained presence. The translational consensus across 3 archive sources was rough but convergent. The one who stayed. The one who stayed. I wrote that in the separate log file. I sat at the terminal for a while afterward, and did not do much of anything in particular. The Keth Sorvath flight line found us in the 23rd month of my posting. 22 ships, arriving in 2 columns, 11 from Korda station direction and 11 from further out on the Korda-Vel reach, bracketing Veln's position with the unhurried precision of something that has been searching for a long time and has finally stopped being uncertain about where to look. I was at the main terminal when the approach signals registered, and I looked at the count for a long moment. 22. The largest transit movement through Veln's relay coverage zone in the entirety of the station's operational existence was a 6-ship freight convoy 7 years prior. I went down to the shelf. He was already there, already raised, already watching the approach vector. He had known before. My sensors registered them. The clear eye was outward, the clouded eye beside it, both oriented away from the station and toward the transit corridor where 22 ships were making their approach. The thermal bloom was elevated, not hot, not the heat of distress, but the particular elevated baseline I had learned to associate with full alertness. The left wing was held slightly open, not for flight, not deployed, but parted at the leading edge the way a door is left ajar to signal willingness. I came to the catwalk rail and said, "They're here." He turned his head, the clear eye on me immediately. I said, 22 ships. I assume you knew before I did." The left ear twitched once. I said, "I want to say something before they arrive, and then I won't say it again, and I won't make you carry it. I want you to know that the last 2 years have been the least lonely I have spent since Lenny died. Not because nothing was wrong, or because the posting wasn't hard in the ways that single-person postings are hard, but because there was, I don't know the right word, presence. There was presence. And I have been a person who has had very little of it, the useful kind, for a number of years. I am saying this not as a claim on you, and not as an expectation of anything, and not because I want you to stay if the right answer is to go. I'm saying it because you have spent 190 years in a place where nothing was said that was true, and I would rather you know the true thing than not. He looked at me for a long time, the full, precise, unblinking attention of something very old and very still. He said, "Keth." I said, "Yeah." The first ships emerged from transit in a sequence that took 47 minutes. I watched from the upper hull observation port as they arranged themselves, not a tactical formation, not aggression geometry, not the posture of an arrival that expects resistance, something ceremonial, something that acknowledged the fact of a place rather than trying to take it. They formed a rough arc, far enough from Veln that there was no sense of encirclement or pressure, each ship oriented with its prow facing the station. They were waiting. A courier shuttle separated from the nearest ship and made for the docking collar. I met it in the bay. 3 of them, 2 attendants, true draconic, bronze-gold scaling with the specific symmetry of creatures who were neither young nor old in any way that translated to a human timescale. And a third who was older and considerably larger, moving through the transit bay with an economy of motion that you find in creatures who have spent centuries deciding not to hurry. The elder's scaling was slate blue, fading to pale at the throat and along the underridge of the jaw. Old patterned in a way that the Transit Natural History database would probably call archival coloration, and that looked, to me, like a creature who remembered things that happened before the station was built and would still be remembering them long after. The elder stopped in the docking corridor and looked at me with both eyes clear, deep, the specific attention of something that is taking accurate inventory. It said, in accented but fully functional transit standard, "You are the keeper of this station." I said, "I am. 11 years and change. Koran Vash." It said, "Keth Vash. We have been looking for Sayeth Vorath of the Keth Sorvath line for 61 years. Our search has been systematic and extensive. We had accounted for every inhabited node on the Cordovel Outer Reach. We had not accounted for the silence he chose." I said, "He's on the shelf. He has been on the shelf for my best calculation. Working from station records and the regional database is somewhere between 190 and 200 years. The station has been here 47 years. He was here before us." The elder said, "We know. The basalt transmits a record. He has been in this rock since before the transit authority existed. The rock carries the imprint of that duration." I said, "He's all right. I want to say that first. Physically, he seems I don't have a medical frame of reference. I'm a relay technician. But he's been mobile. He's going out to eat. The wing scar is old and healed. The right eye is clouded, but I don't know if that's injury or age." The elder said, "Age. He has been clouded in that eye for longer than this station has existed." I said, "Then, it's been managed. He's been managing." The elder said, "He spoke." I said, 15 months ago, approximately. He said one word, 2 syllables, Keth. It said, "To you." I said, "To me, directly." And I have recordings of a structured vocalization that predates that by approximately 8 months, if the recordings are useful to you. The elder looked at the 2 attendants. Something passed between them, not words I could hear, a shift in posture, a quality of shared attention, received and acknowledged. The elder said, "Vash, will you take us to him?" I took them down, through the interior hatch, along the catwalk, to the rail. The elder came to the edge and looked out at the shelf. Sayeth was in the center, fully raised, both eyes oriented outward. The left wing was open at the leading edge. He was not looking at us. He was looking toward the transit corridor, where 21 ships were holding position. Then he turned his head. Not to the elder, not first. To me. The clear eye held mine for a specific, counted moment. Then he turned to the elder. The elder said something in the Keth Sorvath line's own speech, not transit standard, something older and more structured, low enough that I felt it in the catwalk rail through my hands. It went on for several minutes. Sayeth listened with his whole body, the specific quality of alert stillness, wings held, the deep rust and pewter head steady. When the elder stopped, Sayeth answered. 3 syllables, even and low, with harmonics that I felt differently than any of the sounds I had recorded in the previous months. What I had recorded had the quality of something being offered, carefully, across a space of uncertainty. This had the quality of something being acknowledged, as though he were saying, "Yes," sighed. "This is what happened, and yes." The elder translated. It said, "He says the station has been adequate." I said, "Good. I'm glad it's been adequate." It said, "He says the station keeper has been less adequate." I looked at it. It said, "I will explain the expression. In the Keth Sorvath line, adequacy is the ceiling of what one expects from a place, or a thing, or a circumstance. It is the word for what is correct and sufficient. What exceeds it is described as a deficiency in adequacy's direction, meaning you have gone beyond correct into something for which adequacy is the wrong measure. It is not a mild compliment. It is the highest register of acknowledgement available in the line's vocabulary for someone who is not of the line. I said, I understand. It said, he says also that you left the hatch open. I said, I did. It said, and spoke when there was no indication of a listener. I said, I wasn't certain. There wasn't one. The elder was quiet for a moment. Then it said, Keth Vash, Korin Vash. He has designated you Keth. You found the translation. I said, the one who stayed. It said, the fuller form, used among the line for formal recognition, is the one who stayed without requiring acknowledgement of the staying. There is a distinction that carries weight in our records. I said, I understand the distinction. The elder said, there is a naming that comes with it, if you accept it, not an obligation, a recognition. When a sovereign ancient of the Keth Sorvath line designates a keeper, the line acknowledges the bond formally, and the name is entered in the flight line's record. He has been our anchor for 340 years. The silence was his choice, and we respected the choice, though the search continued. You kept the anchor's fire company, while the anchor was silent. The line wishes to enter that in the record, if you are willing. I looked out at the shelf. Saith had turned his head again, not to the elder, not to the transit standard conversation, but to me. The clear eye on me, steady, the whole ancient body oriented with a precision that told me this question was being answered together, or not at all. I said, I'm willing. What followed was not quick. The 22 ships rearranged themselves over the course of 40 minutes into a configuration I had never seen and could not have described accurately, not tactical, not purely ceremonial, but something that combined both into a form that seemed to say, we are bearing witness. They held position while the elder spoke a continuous formal statement in the Keth Sorvath line's own speech, low and structured and long. Saith listened with his whole body. Twice during the statement, the harmonics shifted into a range that I felt in my teeth and in the back of my skull, a resonance that was not quite sound and not quite anything else. And the 22 ships on the approach vector answered it. A response that was not radio signal and not transit standard communication, but something that traveled through the basalt and the station hull and the catwalk rail and the palms of my hands. At the end of it, the elder turned to me and said, the line acknowledges the bond, Keth Vash, the one who kept the anchor's fire company while the anchor was silent. I said, Keth Vash. Saith turned fully toward me and spoke. One word, the familiar 2 syllables, but the harmonics were different from any version I had recorded. Fuller, more resonant, with something in it that felt like what it sounds like when a person says a word they have been holding for a very long time and finally decides it can be said in full. Keth. I said, yeah. The elder said. He says also, and I note this is unusual, the line's vocabulary does not often extend to the domestic that the coffee was acceptable. I said, he's been smelling the coffee through the hull for 2 years? It said, his olfactory range in this type of basalt iron composite extends considerably further than that. I said, please tell him the blend is a generic relay station procurement, and he would find considerably better on Corda Station proper if he were ever interested. Saith made a sound, not Keth, something shorter, brighter, with a harmonic that I had never heard from him before and that the elder translated after a moment as, the line's expression for the awareness that something better exists elsewhere, but the present thing is sufficient and present, and therefore preferable. I said, I will remember that. The elder said, Keth Vash, we will remain at this position through the next transit cycle, 2 station days, perhaps 3. Saith will determine what comes after. He has designated his own timing. We will not press it. I said, I understand. I'll leave the hatch open. The elder looked at me for a moment. a long and specific look, and then it made a sound that was very short and very low, a sound that the two attendants behind it echoed. I did not know the Keth Sorvath line's vocabulary well enough to translate it. I thought it might be the expression for something that is both understood and worth noting anyway. I went back inside and ran the afternoon calibration. The eastern antenna was holding. The thermal anomaly was present at an elevated baseline. The shelf currently had a 190-year-old ancient, plus 2 bronze-gold attendants, and the residual warmth of a formal recognition that had traveled through the basalt and the hull and the catwalk and the rail in my hands. I logged it as normal. The supply drone was due in 12 days. I put a request in for 2 additional heating coils and a thermal blanket rated for exterior hull component protection. It was in the approved maintenance equipment category, which it genuinely was. I logged the request as routine maintenance preparation. It was routine, in the sense that everything I had done for 2 years at Veln was routine. The same hatch, the same catwalk, the same calibration, the same coffee in the same cup, every day. Whether or not there was any indication it was doing anything at all. The Keth Sorvath column departed over the following 3 days, 1 ship at a time, each one pausing on the outbound vector before jumping in the way that you pause in a doorway when you are leaving a place you are glad to have found. The last ship went at 0610 station time on the 3rd day, and I watched it go from the observation port. And then the transit corridor was as it always had been. Brown dwarf light that barely qualified as light, the basalt shelf below me, the relay array above me, and the thermal bloom steady on the sensor readout at 6 degrees above ambient. I went down to the catwalk. He was in the center of the shelf, head raised, both eyes on the transit corridor, watching the empty space where 22 ships had been. I came to the rail and stood for a moment without saying anything. The brown dwarf's light, such as it was, fell on his scales at the angle it always fell, making the rust tones amber and the pewter almost silver, the same light I had been looking at for 2 years. He turned, the clear eye on me, direct and complete. I said, 4 years left on the posting, and then I'll put in for a renewal. I suspect they'll approve it. The transit authority has never understood why anyone stays at Veln voluntarily, and they've never tried to find out, which means they tend to leave well enough alone. He looked at me. I said, I know I said I wouldn't make a claim. I'm not. I'm just telling you what I'm going to do. What you do is yours. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Keth. I said, yeah. I ran the calibration. He watched from the shelf, the deep rust and pewter body still in the brown dwarf's minimal light, the left wing held slightly open at the leading edge the way it always was now, by default, as though the decision to be slightly open had been made and recorded and required no further revisiting. The thermal bloom held steady at 6 degrees. The eastern antenna was fine. The mounting screw was holding. I shut down the tablet and put it in the bracket. I said, the thermal blanket will be on the next supply drop. I'm going to attempt to fold it so it covers the north end of the shelf, where the temperature runs lowest in the cold cycle. I don't know if the geometry will work. We'll figure it out when it gets here. He closed his eye. I went back inside. I updated the station log. Thermal anomaly present, consistent with established baseline. Ongoing monitoring in effect. No action required. I made coffee. I drank it at the terminal. I listened to the station's various small sounds, the ventilation cycling, the relay array's low mechanical hum, the occasional ping of a transit signal passing through on its way to somewhere else, the particular creak of the anchor struts when the brown dwarf's tidal output shifted. And below all of that, barely audible through the hull, the long, slow rhythm of something very old and very large breathing on the basalt shelf below me, steady as the rock itself, as it had been steady for 190 years, and would be steady, I thought, for a considerable time to come. That was sufficient. That was exactly sufficient.